Welcome, and take a slow, easy breath. You're here now, in a quiet place. The day is finished. The light has dimmed, and somewhere beyond your window, the night stretches out, soft and still. This is Dream in Historian Channel, a space where the noise of the present fades into the distance, and history becomes something gentle, something you can drift into. If you enjoy these quiet journeys through the forgotten corners of the past, you might want to subscribe not now, but perhaps later. When your eyes grow heavy and your breathing slows. Each week, we travel somewhere new. Sometimes it's a bustling medieval town, sometimes a forgotten empire, and sometimes, like tonight, we go further back than memory itself. Before the cities, before the kings and temples, before writing, before war, before even the idea of history, there was cold, the Ice Age, a time when glaciers reached down from the poles like slow, white beasts, when vast herds moved across plains of frozen grass and the sky itself seemed heavier, a pale vault of endless gray. It was a world of silence and endurance, a world where survival meant patience and wisdom and fire, where people lived close to the land, to the cold, and to each other. Tonight, we'll walk through that world softly, carefully, the way one might walk through falling snow. We'll start with the daily life of a hunter-gatherer. How they ate, how they stayed warm, what it felt like to wake up in a shelter made of skin and bone. Then, we'll follow the first migrations. Those slow, astonishing journeys that carried humanity across frozen seas and new continents. We'll pause in the caves, where the first artists painted memories on stone, and where color and light were born from darkness. And finally, we'll end our journey inside the fragile warmth of an Ice Age clan, where firelight flickered across faces, and the first stories of humanity were whispered to the wind. So, let's begin. Close your eyes if you'd like. Imagine the world as it was 20,000 years ago. The air is colder, the stars are sharper, and beneath your feet, the earth sleeps under a skin of ice. Firelight, fear, and fragile shelters. The Ice Age was not a season, nor even a lifetime. It was an age, an era so vast that generations came and went beneath the same gray sky, each one inheriting the same cold wind and the same uncertain promise of survival. Imagine a world where the air itself seemed heavier, where each breath carried the scent of snow and smoke, where the sun never rose warmly enough to soften the frozen earth. The land was open, boundless, and quiet, stretching farther than the eye could follow, a plain of white and silver, broken only by the slow, deliberate movement of herds in the distance. In the early light, the world stirred slowly. The first sound was often the crack of wood, brittle, dry, snapping as a hand fed it into the embers of a dying fire. Smoke curled lazily into the pale air, clinging to hides and hair. Around the faint glow, people began to wake, children shifting beneath furs, hunters tightening their belts, women checking the baskets and tools left by the door. No one spoke at first. Silence was not something to break. It was the natural rhythm of the morning, a kind of shared listening to the pulse of the land outside. Inside the shelter, a dome of branches, bones, and stitched hides. Warmth was precious and temporary. It gathered near the fire like a living thing, and just a step too far into the shadows meant the return of the cold. The walls creaked softly as the wind pressed against them. Beyond those walls, the snow waited, soft and endless. Somewhere out there, the hunters' traps had been laid the night before. Lines of stones, carved hooks, the faint trace of human order in an untamable landscape. Each trap was a whisper of hope. When one of them finally rose, wrapping a fur cloak over their shoulders, the cold reached for them instantly. Breath turned to mist. The ground crunched underfoot. Around the camp, the horizon was blurred by frost. The edges of the world softened into pale light. Somewhere far off, the muffled grunt of an animal echoed low, uncertain. To the Ice Age hunter, such a sound was both a promise and a warning. Everything beyond the firelight was alive, but not always friendly. The day began with work, always work. The fire needed feeding, hides needed scraping, sinew needed twisting into cord. Food was not stored in baskets or granaries. It was carried in the stomach, fleeting and finite. When hunger returned, and it always did, there was no waiting. The hunters took up their spears, checked the sharpness of flint blades, and moved silently across the snow. Their steps were slow, deliberate, the rhythm of people who had learned to conserve energy as though it were gold. They read the land like language, a broken twig, a faint print, a patch of melted snow. All spoke of movement. They could tell how long ago an animal had passed, whether it was hungry, tired, wounded. This was not knowledge written in books, but memory carried through generations, taught not by words, but by imitation, by watching, by surviving. In that silence, the hunter was both reader and participant in a story as old as the world. Sometimes, the hunt succeeded. A mammoth brought down after days of tracking. A deer caught in a pit. The air would fill with the smell of smoke and fat, and for a brief time, the camp would know abundance. There would be laughter, stories, small songs sung softly under the stars. But there were more days when the traps were empty, when the snow fell too fast, when even the fire seemed smaller than usual. Those were the days that defined them. The long hunger, the waiting, the quiet persistence that shaped the bones of humanity itself. And yet, even in such a harsh existence, beauty was never absent. Their tools were not crude. They were crafted with care and precision. A bone needle, polished smooth as ivory. A spear point flaked to perfect symmetry. A shell pendant, carved and worn against the skin. Every object bore the trace of thought, of patience, of time, of pride. They were not simply surviving. They were creating meaning within survival. When night returned, as it always did quickly, they gathered once more around the fire. The sky above was deep and crowded with stars, unpolluted, eternal. The fire crackled softly, throwing golden light against the curved walls of the shelter. Faces flickered in its glow, tired, marked by smoke and age, but content in the small warmth they had made. Someone, often the eldest, would begin to speak, a voice slow and low, weaving stories that had no written form but lived in memory. Tales of great hunts, of spirits that lived in the ice, of the first ancestors who walked beside the animals before language had shape. The stories were not just entertainment. They were survival in another form, a way to carry identity through time. Children listened with eyes half closed, the rhythm of the storyteller's voice mingling with the sound of the fire and the wind. In that moment, time seemed to stretch and soften. The vastness of the world outside the endless cold, the hunger, the distance, all of it faded into the gentle hum of familiarity. Within that circle of light, humanity existed not as conqueror of nature, but as part of it, fragile and aware. Sometimes, when the wind was particularly strong, they sang. The song was low, almost like a hum, carried by the women as they worked or tended to the fire. It wasn't music as we know it now. It had no instruments, no structure, just a slow, repeating tone, rising and falling like breath. It filled the silence without disturbing it, a kind of heartbeat shared among them. Some researchers believe this may have been the beginning of music itself, an attempt to make rhythm out of survival. There were nights, too, when fear crept closer. The glow of eyes just beyond the firelight, the sudden snap of a branch, the soft growl of something moving through the dark. They would sit still, listening. No one shouted. Fear was not met with panic, but with quiet attention. It was a part of life, as familiar as the wind. In time, the danger would pass, and someone would feed another branch to the flames. Even in death there was care. Graves from that era tell us more than any story ever could. Bodies arranged carefully, covered in red ochre, the color of life, of blood, of dawn. Tools placed beside them, beads of bone or ivory strung around the neck, sometimes even flowers laid nearby. These were gestures of remembrance, of belief, of love. They suggest that even before temples or kingdoms, humans had already learned reverence, that deep, wordless understanding that life, however small, is sacred. The Ice Age hunter did not see themselves as separate from the world. but woven into it. Every step in the snow, every meal shared, every story told was part of a larger pattern that stretched beyond comprehension. The land was both cruel and generous. It took without warning, but it also offered wonder, the shimmer of auroras above a frozen plain, the quiet majesty of herds moving under the moon, the unending beauty of survival itself. And so, when the last fire of the night dimmed and the wind began to whisper through the hides once more, the small clan would sleep close together, breathing in rhythm, hearts beating softly beneath layers of fur. Outside, the ice waited, the stars turned, and deep within the dark, humanity dreamed not of conquest, but of warmth. The first migration. How small groups crossed frozen worlds in silence. Imagine a small band of travelers moving across an ocean of ice. There are no roads, no signs, and no maps. Only memory and instinct. The horizon stretches endlessly, pale and shimmering, where the snow meets the sky in a seamless blur. Each step is slow, deliberate, and muffled by layers of fur and frost. The air is still, thick with the faint hiss of falling snow. Behind them, the land they once knew is fading, a place of scarcity, of competition, of memories that can no longer feed the living. Ahead of them lies the unknown, a world no one has yet named. Migration, for these early humans, was not adventure. It was necessity wrapped in endurance. Hunger drove them forward, as did the rhythm of the seasons and the slow but steady creep of the ice sheets that swallowed the land. What began as a short journey to find new hunting grounds could become a generation-long passage. Families moved, not because they wished to, but because the earth itself seemed to be pushing them onward. The wind came from the north, carrying with it the sharp scent of glaciers and the quiet warning of extinction. They traveled in groups small enough to move quietly, yet large enough to protect one another. Men, women, children. Each had a role. Each carried something essential. One might bear the fire tools, carefully wrapped in hide to protect the embers. Another would carry the stone blades, polished and bound with sinew. The elders, though slower, carried stories, the memory of rivers and landmarks that no longer existed, the paths once taken by their ancestors. These stories were not entertainment. They were maps. Invisible, but vital. At night, when the cold deepened, they built small shelters from what they could find. Bones of great beasts, branches, snow packed hard into walls. Inside, the air was thin and dry, but the fire gave light and a sense of safety. The flicker of flames against ice was mesmerizing, almost sacred. It reminded them that warmth was possible, that life still persisted even at the edge of the world. Outside, the wind moved endlessly, shaping dunes of snow like waves across a frozen sea. Sometimes they followed the stars, sometimes they followed the herds, the mammoths, the reindeer, the great shaggy bison. These animals were both guide and sustenance. Where they went, people followed, tracing migrations older than language. The hunters observed them in silence, learning their rhythms when they rested, when they moved, when the calves were born. In this long, slow pursuit, the bond between human and animal became something more than survival. It became understanding, a kind of unspoken agreement between species bound by the same cold. Crossing rivers was the most dangerous part. Ice could crack without warning. A single misstep meant the loss of food, tools, or life itself. Yet they learned to read the texture of the frozen surface, the faint sound of strain beneath the snow, the color of the light reflecting through the cracks. They moved like shadows, testing each step, trusting the oldest among them to choose the way. The ice moaned beneath their weight, but often, miraculously, it held. For months, perhaps years, the migration continued. The landscape changed only slightly. A line of hills here, a cluster of frozen trees there. Occasionally, they found traces of others who had passed before them. A blackened ring of stones from an old fire, a broken spearhead half buried in the frost. These discoveries were small comforts, proof that they were not the only ones searching. It was a quiet reminder of the vast web of humanity spreading slowly across continents, each group unaware of the others, yet united in their shared struggle to endure. Food was always uncertain. Some days, they ate well. Roasted meat, marrow, fat stored carefully in hides. Other days, they survived on roots or dried scraps. The thin among them grew thinner, but no one was left behind. Isli, when one fell ill, the group waited, sometimes for days, hoping strength would return. Compassion was not luxury, it was survival. The tribe could not afford cruelty. Cooperation was their only defense against extinction. As they moved northward, the world became stranger. The light changed, softer, more diffuse, lingering at the edges of the sky. The sun no longer climbed high, and at times, the world seemed caught in perpetual twilight. They walked through valleys carved by glaciers, walls of ice rising hundreds of feet high, glowing faintly blue from within. The silence was immense, almost alive. Even the sound of footsteps seemed swallowed by it. To live in such a place was to exist within eternity. Time slowed, sound faded, and thought itself became small and still. At the edge of the land, where the sea froze solid, they crossed into new worlds. What had once been ocean was now a bridge of ice, a vast, gleaming expanse that connected continents. The journey across it was long and dangerous, but it was also the beginning of something monumental. The spread of humanity into the Americas, into Siberia, into lands no one had ever seen. Each footstep on that frozen bridge was a moment in the great quiet march of evil, uncelebrated, but utterly profound. When storms came, they huddled together, listening to the wind howl across the plains. The snow would rise in spirals, erasing the horizon, making the world smaller until only the fire remained. Time seemed to pause during these tempests. They told stories to keep the dark at bay. Stories of spirits that guarded the journey, of ancestors who had walked the same path long ago. The act of telling was itself resistance, a way to stay human in an environment that cared nothing for them. Sometimes, when the clouds cleared, they saw the aurora ribbons of green and violet twisting silently across the night sky. To them, it was a sign, perhaps of gods or souls or the breath of the earth itself. They would stand in the snow, faces tilted upward, breath catching in the cold air, feeling both small and infinite. It was beauty at the edge of survival, proof that even in desolation, the world could still astonish. As generations passed, the descendants of those wanderers would forget the details of the journey, but keep its rhythm in their bones, the movement, the endurance, the quiet cooperation. These became the foundation of human life. Migration was not merely travel, it was identity. It taught us how to adapt, how to share, how to imagine what lies beyond the horizon. And so, somewhere on that vast white plain, as the stars wheel overhead and the fire burns low, a child might look out across the frozen emptiness and wonder what lies beyond. That curiosity, that small spark of imagination amid the endless cold, is what carried humanity forward, step by step, into every corner of the earth. Cave paintings, the human mind, art as survival and memory. Far beneath the frozen surface of the Ice Age world, there were places of warmth and light, places where the breath of fire met the stillness of stone. Inside those ancient caverns, the air trembled with smoke and quiet reverence. It is here that we find the earliest traces of imagination, the moment when survival met the soul. Imagine entering such a space. The ground is uneven, slick with centuries of mineral damp. The light from a fat-burning lamp flickers across the walls, chasing shadows that seem almost alive. You can hear only your own breathing, slow, echoing, soft against the hollow earth. In front of you, the rock face glows a faint gold, and then you see them. Animals emerge from the dark herds of bison, horses, and deer, drawn with lines both simple and graceful. They gallop across the contours of the stone, their movement created by the flicker of flame. The artist, perhaps kneeling where you now stand, knew how to make the wall breathe. Every curve, every hollow, every rise of the rock was used to give life to what was imagined. These were not paintings made for beauty alone. They were prayers, stories, and lessons woven together in color. In Tosa days, Survival depended on the animals, and so they became sacred. To paint them was to understand them, to honor them, and perhaps to control the mysterious rhythm of the hunt. The pigments came from the earth itself. Ochre for red, charcoal for black, manganese for deep brown. They crushed them with stone, mixed them with fat or water, and applied them with fingers, sticks, or hollow bones. Each stroke was deliberate, each color chosen with purpose. Even today, thousands of years later, their hues remain faded, yet alive, as though time itself could not erase them. And then there were the handprints, dozens of them, sometimes open and clear, sometimes negative outlines where the artist had blown pigment around their own fingers. Each one feels like a whisper across time. I was here. It is one of the most human gestures imaginable, to leave behind proof of existence, to say, without words, that your life touched the world. Some of those hands were small, but the hands of children. Others were broad and rough, belonging to the hunters, the elders. See, they formed something that feels almost like family. Each print, each mark, part of a single, collective memory. It reminds us that early humans did not think only of themselves, but of the community, the continuity of being. In one moment, art became memory. The cave became a kind of archive, a place where the past could live in the present. Every painting was a story preserved of abundance and hunger, of seasons, of creatures long vanished. To look at those walls is to read a language written before writing itself. Imagine the scene. Deep in the cave, a small group gathers. The air is thick and warm from torches. The shaman stands before the wall, chanting softly, the same rhythm that echoes in the heartbeat. The others watch as smoke curls toward the ceiling. In that glow, the painted animals seem to move. They seem to breathe. This was not performance. It was connection between the seen and the unseen, between the hunters and the hunted, between the living and whatever waited beyond death. The people believed that images held power. To paint an animal was to call upon its spirit. To repeat its form was to invite its return. And yet, there was more than superstition here. There was thought, reflection. Curiosity. These early artists were not merely surviving. They were observing. They were interpreting the world and giving it structure. They were shaping meaning where before there had been only instinct. Perhaps the act of painting changed them. Perhaps in those dark chambers, where imagination became visible, they began to understand themselves. To picture something is to step outside of it, to become aware of thought. In this way, the first paintings may also mark the birth of consciousness as we know it. The caves themselves were chosen with care. Many were hidden, deep within narrow tunnels. Some required crawling through total darkness to reach the painted chambers. Why? Because these were not public galleries. They were sacred places, perhaps known only to a few initiates, elders, storytellers. To enter was to cross into the world of spirit, and in that world, silence mattered. The only sounds were breath, the crackle of flame, and the soft scrape of pigment against stone. Time slowed. The line between dream and reality blurred. When the artist painted a bison, they did not see a drawing. They saw a being. In that moment, the painted animal was alive. When modern archaeologists rediscovered these caves, they too fell silent. Many describe the experience as spiritual, not because of religion, but because of the overwhelming sense of presence. Standing before art that predates civilization by tens of thousands of years, one cannot help but feel both small and infinite. It is humbling to realize that, long before cities, before kingdoms, before even language as we know it, humans were already creating beauty. They were already expressing fear, gratitude, and wonder. The instinct to make art, to translate experience into image, was there from the beginning. Art was survival, not luxury. It gave shape to emotions that could not be spoken. It turned chaos into story. In the flickering glow of those first torches, people found a way to endure not just the cold, but the vast loneliness of existence. Art made the world comprehensible, even when it was cruel. Every brush of pigment, every mark on stone was an act of faith. Faith that meaning could be made. Faith that memory could outlast death. And in that, these early artists were not so different from us. We, too, seek permanence in impermanent things. We, too, tried to leave behind proof that we were here. Perhaps that is why those ancient handprints feel so intimate. They are not strangers. They are us reaching across the chasm of millennia, inviting us to remember that imagination is what makes us human. The same spark that danced in those caves still glows within us. Every story, every song, every quiet thought before sleep, all are echoes of that first flickering flame. So when you think of the Ice Age, do not imagine only cold and hunger. Imagine the warmth of a torch in the dark. Imagine the color of red ochre on stone. Imagine a small hand pressed against a wall, trembling slightly, as a voice whispers a song we will never hear again. That moment, that heartbeat in the dark, is where humanity truly began. Inside an ice-aged clan, cooperation, superstition, and nightly storytelling. Outside, the wind moves across the tundra in long, low sighs. The world is pale and endless, a horizon of ice and sky, where the sun glows faintly through the mist like a dim coin. But deep within a hollow stone, sheltered by hides and firelight, life gathers close. This is the heart of an Ice Age clan. The first thing you would notice is the rhythm, the soft, repetitive sounds that make up the texture of their nights. The pop of wood as it burns, the rustle of furs being pulled tighter, the quiet murmur of voices, layered like music, telling and retelling the stories that have bound them together for generations. Imagine crouching inside one of their shelters. It is smaller than you might expect, a curved frame of mammoth bone, covered in hides sewn with sinew. The floor is lined with dried grasses. In the center burns a shallow fire, its smoke rising through a small hole above. The air smells of wood and fat, of warmth and survival. Around the fire, the clan gathers a small, living constellation of faces. Lit by flickering light, each face tells a different story. The elders, with their lined skin and slow, measured speech. The mothers, weaving cord or mending clothing as they listen. The hunters, quiet and still, sharpening their points from habit more than need. And the children, restless, wide-eyed, waiting for the stories to begin. This nightly ritual was more than entertainment. It was memory, the oral heartbeat of Ice Age humanity. Every story held lessons. Where to find the best game, when the rivers froze, how to recognize the tracks of predators. But the stories also spoke of things unseen, of spirits in the wind, of ancestors who watched from the stars, of the great animals who gave their bodies so that the people might live another season. In these stories, the world was not divided between man and nature. It was one. The animals were not merely prey. They were keen beings of spirit, with will and wisdom. To hunt them required permission, and to waste them was unthinkable. When a mammoth fell, every part of it was used. The meat dried, the bones shaped, the hide stretched and cured. Even the act of taking life was wrapped in ritual. They believed that the world was full of signs, in the shape of clouds, in the cry of birds, in the direction of the wind. Dreams, too, were messages. If a hunter dreamt of a white reindeer, it was taken as a sign of fortune or warning, depending on the dream's tone. The shaman, half healer, half poet, interpreted these things, moving between the visible and invisible worlds. A shaman's tools were few: bones, stones, a drum made of stretched hide. The sound of that drum echoed like a heartbeat in the cave's hollow air. Its rhythm guided trance, a journey inward, to seek wisdom, or healing, or forgiveness. To the clan, these rituals were as vital as fire. They made sense of a world that was often senseless, and that world could be cruel. The Ice Age did not forgive carelessness. A sudden storm could erase a path in minutes. A hunt gone wrong could mean hunger for weeks. Illness spread quickly in the close, cold quarters of their shelters. The people learned to rely on each other completely. Every task, from child rearing to food gathering, was shared. Every success was communal. Every loss was felt by all. The rhythm of survival was constant, but not joyless. There were small moments of peace. The sharing of cooked meat, the laughter of children rolling in the snow, the soft hum of lullabies, sung in languages that no longer exist. They made ornaments from bone and amber, carved figurines of animals and humans, perhaps as charms or tokens of hope. Even in hardship, they sought beauty. By the fire's light, they also taught. The elders passed down skills: how to make stone tools, how to read the sky, how to track herds across the snow. Knowledge was survival, and teaching was sacred. No word was wasted, no lesson taken lightly. Sometimes, when the fire burned low, they told stories of the past, of ancestors who had crossed the frozen lands when the world was still new. The children listened, wide-eyed, as if those distant travelers were still walking among them. In their imagination, time folded. The past and present became one. There were also songs, long, rhythmic chants that rose and fell like breathing. Some told of the hunt, others of love, or loss, or gratitude. They sang, not to be heard, but to remember. The songs made the night feel less vast. The voices made the cold seem less cruel. Superstition wove through every part of their life. But it was not foolishness. It was an understanding that existence was fragile, and that meaning could be found even in small things. A cracked stone might foretell the coming thaw. A bird's sudden silence might warn of predators. The clan lived by listening to nature, to one another, to the quiet between sounds. When morning came, the fire was coaxed back to life. The hunters prepared for another day, wrapping themselves in thick hides, checking the tips of their spears. The air outside bit like ice against skin, but it was familiar, expected. The women tended to the young, repaired clothing, or gathered what the cold still offered: roots, moss, frozen berries. Even in winter the world gave, if one knew where to look. And as the sun rose faintly over the horizon, turning the snow to gold, the camp stirred into motion. It was a fragile, steady rhythm, one day feeding the next, one generation carrying the lessons of the last. The Ice Age may have been brutal, but it was also deeply human. In that endless cycle of labor and warmth, fear and faith, we see the first outlines of civilization. If you listen closely, you can almost hear them still. The murmuring of voices by the fire, the faint drumbeat of a shaman's trance, the soft sigh of wind against hide walls. In that fragile shelter, surrounded by darkness and cold, humanity learned not only how to endure, but how to belong. Theirs was a world of superstition, yes, but also of empathy. A world built on cooperation, storytelling, and a shared understanding that survival was not merely physical. It was emotional. It was spiritual. It was collective. And so, when night fell again, the firelight returned. The circle formed once more. Someone began to speak an old story, told 1,000 times before, but never quite the same. The children leaned closer. The shadows on the walls shifted and danced. Outside, the wind howled. But inside, there was warmth, and there was meaning. It is easy, now, to see these people as primitive, but in truth, they were the architects of humanity. Around those ancient fires, they built the foundations of community, of myth, of art. They made sense of a cold, uncertain world, and in doing so, they created something eternal. Their stories became the seed of every story told since. The rhythm of their voices became the heartbeat of history itself. And though the Ice Age ended, the warmth of their fire, that fragile circle of light, never truly went out. And so, the long night of the Ice Age fades. The winds that once swept across the tundra grow quieter now, soft as breath. The fires we sat beside, those fragile, flickering circles of warmth, burn lower, until all that remains is a faint glow, and the memory of the people who kept them alive. You can almost see them still in the corner of your mind. A small group, huddled close against the cold, faces illuminated by amber light, shadows shifting across the curved walls of their shelter. The children half asleep, their heads resting on fur. The hunter's silent eyes heavy from the day's journey. The shaman gazing into the flames, lost between worlds. And outside, the wind whispering over endless snow, like time itself, breathing. It was a world without cities, without metal, without writing, and yet it was not empty. It was full of rhythm, of meaning, of endurance. Each heartbeat, each breath, each spark of firelight was a quiet act of defiance against the cold. The people of the Ice Age did not conquer the world, they endured it. They did not shape nature, they learned to listen to it. And in that listening, they created something remarkable: community. They learned that warmth was not just found in fire, but in one another. That stories could feed the spirit when food was scarce. That superstition, song, and memory were not foolish, but necessary. For when everything is frozen, belief itself becomes a form of heat. If you trace your own life far enough back, every story, every invention, every dream, you arrive here, at the quiet heart of the Ice Age. At the small fire where humanity began to imagine. We are their descendants, every one of us. Their courage echoes in the bones of cities. Their songs still hum beneath the noise of our world. The same stars they watched are still above us, unchanged. The same wind that carried their voices still moves through the dark. So as you lie here now, listening, breathing, feeling the stillness of the night, imagine that same stillness 10,000 years ago. A mother's hand brushing a child's hair, a father's whisper of a story about the hunt, a clan falling into sleep, their dreams shaped by the rhythm of fire and wind. The Ice Age has long passed, but its silence, that vast white silence, remains in us, a reminder of how small we are, and how extraordinary it is that we are here at all. And now, let that thought drift. Let the sound of your breath become the slow rhythm of snow falling. Let the darkness of your room become the ancient night sky. Let the warmth of your blanket become the comfort of a fur-lined shelter. You've walked through an age of hunger and endurance. You've stood beneath skies filled with ice. You've sat beside the first storytellers and heard the first echoes of what would become history. Now, it's time to rest. The fire grows dim, the clan sleeps, and the world, for a little while, is quiet again. If you've enjoyed this journey through the frozen heart of the past, take a moment before sleep fully takes you to subscribe to Boring History for Sleep. Here, the stories of humanity unfold not as noise, but as whispers, and every night we'll travel again. Through time, through silence, through memory. Good night. And may your dreams be warm.